This is a small portion of our amaranth harvest, and I've been drying it in our dehydrator. Only problem is I don't have a good way of keeping it from falling through the cracks because the seeds are very, very small. You can see how small they are. Anyway, so I've been making something for that. I made a tray out of a light nylon fabric with a raised edge so that when the amaranth goes in and is raked down, it can slip into the dehydrator with ease. My dehydrator set at its lowest temp so that the amaranth does not get too hot. I'm going to show you how I made them. I showed you what I was making. The first thing I need to do is make this little band that goes around it. A couple years ago when I ordered a new refrigerator, it came all strapped up. And I looked at the strapping and I said, you know, someday that might be useful. And apparently today it will be. So what I need to do is cover it. It's kind of ugly and it might catch things in it. And these screens will actually go into the laundry at times, and I want them to be covered so it'll protect it a little bit. Anyway, I wanted to cover it with fabric, and I had a couple of rolls of bias tape that was cut for a quilt, but was extra. Now, neither one of them is big enough to go around this and then have excess over here for sewing. So what I did is I put them together like this. One down like that. The other one right sides facing like this. Right sides facing. Okay? Line it up. Flip it over. I want the larger one on the back side so I can see it as I sew. Then I lay this on top, and all I'm going to do is give it a little bit of space here, and I'm going to sew right there. So the three pieces together, the strapping, one here and one there. And I will do that and be back. Now that that's done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it. Well, first of all, I'm going to trim any excess off the edges that I don't want carried along the sides. Okay, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the blue one, the solid blue one, around like this. Okay, so that it looks like that. That way I'll have both sides covered. And it'll look neat. I mean, this is just a piece to go in my dehydrator. But hopefully it'll last several years. And I want it to look nice and I want it to hold up. So I'm going to sew that stitch in the ditch there. Very carefully laying it over as I go, pulling it nice and tight. And I'll finish this and be back. Well, now that's done. Next, what I need to do is I need to run a stitch right here along the edge so that I catch a little bit of this and both of these. I'll do that and be back. By the way, this is basically done by feel. I can feel the piece underneath there, and I know where it sits, and I want to just catch the edge, maybe a 1/16 of an inch of it. All right, that makes my lip for my screen. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to even this up on the edge. I don't want to cut too much of it off because I'm going to need something to catch on the bottom screen. Just even it up. Okay, be right back. The next part I need is the lining here. What I did was I simply took my tray that fits into my dehydrator. I laid it on my fabric, okay, and this is a nylon. I think it was originally intended for wedding dresses. I've had it for many years. A friend of mine who did wedding dresses, a bolt got water stained. She had a leak and it got water stained, and she had no need for it because it was water stained. So she gifted it to me, and I've probably kept hold of it for close to 25 years. Been using a little bit here and there. And when we got our dehydrators, because this is not our first dehydrator, I found that the fabric was really nice to make screens. But most of the time, it just makes a screen. It's washable. I finish it off with a serger edge. And in this case, all I did was I just traced the tray and took my serger and edged it, being very careful that at the corners I caught all the fabric and did not miss some. Now, this is what we are going to finish with. Let me show you how to do that. Okay, I don't want to start at the corner. Never start at the corner. What I want to do is I want to lay this down about in the middle here. Don't start stitching it because we're going to have to finish this off and sew the end together, so we want room to do that. Let me give myself a little more room here. What we're going to do is we're going to try to sew right here, right on the edge, okay, of just the fabric. If we catch just the fabric, it'll make it easier. Okay, now, the first part of it is easy. Don't start sewing here. Sew a little bit back so you'll have room to catch that loose edge. Okay, here we go. Just line it up and go to town. The only problem is the corners, and what you're going to have to do is you're just going to have to kind of take that and work it around the corners the best you can. Remember, this is just a screen for a dehydrator, and when it's in use, nobody sees it. And if you should catch some of that webbing, don't worry about it. It'll be fine because we're going to sew it. Actually, we're going to sew this seam to the webbing. As you can see, I gave myself a little extra, probably a little more extra than I intended. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to let an overlap of at least 1/2 inch or so. And I'm going to cut the excess off. Let's make sure we got that lined up. we go. Now what I want to do is I want to line these two up, and I'm actually going to use a pin to make sure I get them where I want them. I'm just going to pin it like that. And I'm going to lay them down on my machine, being sure not to catch this part. We need to put 2 rows of stitching down so that we catch both edges, the one on this side and the one on the back side, very well. I stitch forward, start in the middle, stitch forward, stitch back. If your machine is, this stuff might give you a little bit of a hassle. And mine is giving me hassle because it keeps breaking my thread. Okay, this needs 2 lines of stitching. Okay, one to catch both edges and give it a little bit of an overlap to make sure it's stays straight. We don't want it to fold in on itself. Now that we have that done, we can sew the last bit of it together. And if you did it right, or close to right, it should line up very nicely. So we just sew it together. That last little bit there. All right, the next thing we want to do is so that it will sit neatly on our tray. We don't want this extra fabric here. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick it up and we're going to lay it up like that so it'll sit neatly. To do that, we're just going to lay it down and go like this all the way around. The only difficult part will be here at the corners. Just make sure you don't get excess fabric into it. All right, we're done, except for trimming a couple of threads, checking it, making sure it looks okay, and turning it right side out. There we go. One little liner for our tray. Okay. I caught it a little bit here, but I think I'll be okay. I might want to let that go, though, because it might catch seeds in there. If you're going to do that, do it carefully, though. Do it from the back side, not the front side, because you don't want to put a hole in this fabric. There we go. Now, I don't think I'm going to restitch that, since that is just a stitch to hold this down. Well, maybe I can. It won't take me but a second. Just make sure I don't catch it again. There we go. That looks better. Now it's ready for amaranth. By the way, amaranth is one of those plants, and I think Joe has a video to show harvesting amaranth. This is a giant amaranth. I think it grows someplace between 7 and 8 feet tall. One plant gives you maybe half a pound to a pound of amaranth, and he's harvesting it now. You harvest it while it's slightly green. Otherwise, if you let it dry out too much, it will drop its seeds to the ground. And we don't want that. Anyway, so it has to be dried. And because the weather conditions are such that drying it outside is basically impossible, Drying it inside takes forever if you just lay it in trays. So we're putting it in the dehydrator with just the fan going, no heat. And we use this amaranth in our rice. We just cook it with rice. Some people like to cook quinoa and rice. Instead of quinoa, we use amaranth. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope this is informative. You can make anything. You just put your mind to it. Sit down and figure out what you want to do and look at what you have and recycle a little bit. Make do with what you've got. I've got one more of these to make, and then I run out of strapping. So he's only going to get 4. I have 6 trays in my dehydrator, but we'll only get 4 of them for amaranth. Anyway, thank you. Like and subscribe.